jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.
Welcome, ladies and gents. I got a very special guest here from Morbidly Beautiful and Munson's at the Movies. We got Stephanie Malone. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. This is exciting.
Likewise, I'm pretty much just covering all kinds of studios and everything. It's fun to kind of mix in a little bit of film history. And I guarantee you, just genre fans have definitely seen some of these unusual movies at just various video stores, especially ones that still exist out there, you know?
I hope that's true. I hope genre fans have seen at least some of these for sure, because there's some real gems.
Sure. So just casually, what was your introduction to any of these? Were you seeing these at Hollywood Video or Blockbuster or independent mom and pop stores?
Yeah, it's funny. I was trying to remember, my first introduction and what I discovered first and sort of because I feel like I, at some point, just went through a craze where I started devouring all of these films.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if I'm trying to remember early introductions, I know Battle Royale was one of my first introductions, where I fell in love and was like, holy shit, this is amazing.
It was anything Asia. Like there was, I think, Joint Security Area, which was like a Japanese whodunit, and then there were None Clone and Takashi Mike. A bunch of his stuff was carried for here, including Audition, and then got even more. But yeah, most of these, this is like the only way we were able to get a lot of South Korean cinema, like Old Boy, and then even just the original versions of Ju-on, The Ring and all that. And so there was a bit of Hong Kong
100%.
stuff and Bangkok material in here. But yeah, I was going on an eBay spree beginning of this last year, and I just said, I found like 2 different packs on eBay that was very affordable. I was like, you know what, I'm doing so much viewing of on my portable player while I'm driving around at work, so I might as well just get a bunch of those and get caught up.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, I know that because the Tartan Asia, it's Japanese, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Thailand. So I remember the Japanese films were sort of my first foray into where I really sort of fell in love with Asian horror. So Battle Royale and Audition.
Some of them were British or American independent ones, but yeah, it's like, do you even recall seeing booklets, like video store catalogs? And there would be like a Tartan Asia one on rare occasions. Sometimes just even snuck inside, a DVD of another one. You're like, oh, okay, I better buy all these other ones.
Yeah, for sure. And I, going back and revisiting some of this stuff, it's funny because like you talk about like the marketing for it, and obviously the selling point was, oh my gosh, this stuff is crazy. It's extreme. It's stuff that you've never seen before. And things like Audition and Old Boy, those are films that really that's what really spurred this,
Yep. A few other
The
just
Isle.
unusuals. Yeah, The Isle, a few Spanish movies that were in there. That one South Korean gangster movie, A Bittersweet Life, got promoted for there. Then there's this other one called The Last Horror Movie, which I think was like it was in the tradition of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Men Bites Dog, where it's like they're making you think it's an actual video diary. I'm like, Jesus.
Yeah, but like it's funny because like rewatching some of the stuff now, it got marketed as like this super extreme, batshit crazy type stuff. But like most of these films are incredibly poignant and beautiful and
very
thought-provoking and emotional. And yeah, I was gonna say it's like it's all about metaphors for grief and sadness and loneliness and despair. I mean, that's pretty much across the board what you get with this Asian horror.
A24 can't even touch this. This is like, no, this is very, very impactful. And I still need to see The Isle, but like there's even some other ones which will start of certain people's careers. Like, have you heard of Monster Man?
I haven't.
It's like basically this one guy, he was like a one and done kind of guy. He was like this independent filmmaker. He was kind of very Sam Raimi, Joe Dante inspired, and he basically it mixed in a bunch of rednecks and hitchhikers and other just outrageous comedic gore. And he later made the over-the-top action movie Shoot 'Em Up with Clive Owen and Monica Bellucci, and then he disappeared. But he had like 2 movies people will remember him by, and it's like, what happened to him?
Wow.
I saw The Wishing Stairs. I didn't realize it was part of a trilogy of The Whispering Corridors, but couldn't get into that one. But it had some ape shit, crazy shit happening in like the last 10 minutes. I was like, no.
I feel like that's a pretty common occurrence where it's sort of a slow burn and then creepy, and then at the end, like shit just hits the fan.
Some of them are really good slow burns, and some of them are boring. But some of them are also is like, this is the only way you were able to get this. It's like if you didn't have a region-free DVD player back in the day.
Have you seen one of the ones that I really recently watched was Hansel and Gretel?
I think it was like a 2002 version of that they did.
I want to say 7, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so more modern, not the Jim Henson Company produced one. It's like, but I think they did. I did see that advertised. I was like, what is that? Then there was like an independent true crime movie, The Hillside Strangler, with C. Thomas Howell and Nicholas Totoro, that was coming out. I find it interesting that Lynn Shay is in that one as well.
Oh wow!
Before her career took off, so it's like, okay.
Yeah, I was kind of looking to see, what the availability of some of these films were, because I think that people need to see at least some of this stuff.
Go for the stolen vaults,
yeah. But I know Hansel and Gretel's on Tubi, and it makes a lot of best Asian horror lists, and it's so beautiful. It's just really haunting and really well done.
Very cool.
So I recommend people check that out because it's something that you can readily access for free, and it's pretty great, and it's at the top of the list of, because you mentioned there's the flagship films that everybody knows that sort of made the label, and then there's there's a few really solid ones, and then there's a whole bunch of just sort of middle of the road type stuff.
Yeah, have you seen Phone yet?
I haven't seen Phone. I know that's definitely.
I couldn't tell if that was like a version of Cellular, but it's apparently like on the heels of the original version of Dark Water and The Ring. So I was like, okay, interesting.
Yeah, I've seen, I think, most, if not all, of the ones that got remade, that got American remakes, because whenever there's an American remake, I wanted to go back and watch the source material, which I wish more people did, because. And I think that's one of the really sad things about, because Asian horror sort of exploded, and then and it exploded in part because all the American remakes, and then I think it started off pretty good, pretty strong, and then most of them are pretty terrible.
Especially
I think,
Bundy from 2002. It was trying to be like, there was always twin films each year. There had to be blockbusters that had similar things, so studios could fool the rival crowd to go to the other one. But it's like, it was on they both distributed both Ed Gein and Bundy, and it's like, well, Ed Gein wasn't great, but it was well acted and very shocking. And Bundy, that had literally no tone.
Yeah, but I think it was like, it was sad because the American stuff was such crap, and people just wouldn't seek out the original stuff. I mean, some people did, but the mainstream audience didn't. And then they just sort of gave up and was like, okay, I'm over Asian horror. And that's really unfortunate because it's one of my favorite types of horror. Like, I'm pretty obsessed with Asian horror. And I mentioned I fell in love with Japanese horror first, but I think probably South Korean horror is my favorite. Once I started kind of discovering that, and some of the new stuff that's been released, it's just, I mean, it's scarier than anything. And I watch a lot of horror, obviously. And
Are you more freaked out by the ghost stuff, or just the more possession and like demons?
You know, my co-host on my podcast that I do, Cheer and Loathing, he makes fun of me a lot because I like films that have layers that are pretty deep. I like films that represent other things, like we talked about, you know, metaphors for grief. Yeah. And so a lot of the ghost stuff, I love the creepy ghost stuff, but I also love, you know, the depth of those films and the emotional appeal, as well as, I mean, I think they do jump scares better than anyone else in the world. Like because when American films do jump scares, it's usually cheap and annoying.
Always.
And you see it coming a mile away, and then you're like, oh God, this is so, you know, in my face, and there's no tension. And Asian horror does such an amazing job building this like incredible tension, and you know, you can tell something's coming, but when it comes, every single time I'm like, oh shit, like I just like jump out of my skin, and it's so well done. I rewatched Tale of Two Sisters, which is one of the big, you know, the big Asian horror films that really started to get people's attention for the Tartan label. And God, have you seen that film?
I have not seen that one, but I definitely saw that on various shelves. I'm like, what is that?
It's so good. And there is a scene where it is just like my heart stopped, and I was like, it's so creepy and so suspenseful and so well done. And the scares are, I mean, they are earned. They are really earned, and I appreciate the hell of it. So yeah, I love the supernatural, but I'm also a big fan of like zombie horror and
oh yeah. But
yeah,
that's where it got really annoying, is like, where can I see one where it's just like, it's actually kind of freaky or cool survival? Because often they'll mix in some mystery, action, and horror, sci-fi elements, but it gets very annoying, like to say, is like, which are the ones where they actually cared about, like, the best ones that I feel are Romero inspired are probably, what's that one from, like, I think it was like 2009. It was like State of Emergency. It was so cool just seeing a guy run around, you know, like a chicken with his head cut off, just trying to figure out, you know, who's still alive at this abandoned barn, and, you know, finds a gun but has no ammo, so he tries to find the ammo, and then he just finds more and more zombies as he goes around, and then he starts messing with the radios. But Warning Sign, I think, is another underrated one from the 80s. But yeah, after a while, it just seemed like everyone was just following just, there's the Resident Evil, now there's World War Z, now there's Walking Dead. So it's like 28 days later. So now
it's definitely oversaturated, and most of it's not great.
Very oversaturated.
So, but when you see something that really does somehow manage to break out of the pack, that's where I know it's like really great, because it's hard to do. Like, I was going to mention Train to Busan, Korean
yes,
film.
Yeah,
so freaking good. And I'm like everybody, I'm like, oh geez, another zombie film. Like, how many are we going to get? But when I see one that is really spectacular and well done like that one, it really stands out. And
I struggled to get into it, but the acting was good.
Really, God, I love that film.
The effects were really bad for me, but
Really?
Yeah, not convincing CGI, but it does have a lot of intense moments, just going train to train, and
it's so intense, and I think it's so well acted, and you know,
definitely
really
got good actors, and they share a lot of them. Like they'll go from one movie to the next. They'll be in a movie where they're playing a mad scientist, and they'll go into one where they're playing a messed up revenge exploitation film. Then they go into another unusual blockbuster.
A movie I just saw at a film festival is The Sadness. And it is one of the most insane films I've ever seen. Like, it is relentless. It is balls to the wall. Like,
Jesus.
It is absolutely bananas. It's super brutal, but it's so much fun, and it's like you don't have a minute to breathe. There's not 1 second where you can just take a breath and be. You talked about like kind of boring or slow or whatever. This film is insane, and I recommend people, if you are a fan of these kind of films, that you check that out when you can, because it's so
Plague
good.
that turns people into deranged, bloodthirsty sadists. Okay.
Yeah, it's got some there's a bit of a tie into
Bloodsuckers.
COVID world as well, because there's this deadly virus that's taking over, and people are denying it and saying it's not a big deal, and
Oh,
all
wow.
the like scientists are warning like this virus is potentially going to mutate, and if it mutates, it could be really awful. And everybody's like, I think it's just government propaganda, so there's a lot of kind of and it's just a little bit, actually, at the beginning there's a little bit of a commentary there, and then
Inevitable.
but once it gets going, it is insane.
Nice.
Yeah, I like the brutal stuff. I think that's super fun. The really intense violence and gore. No, that's not for everyone, but I really appreciate
just
that. It's
depends
one of
on
the
the
reasons I
tone.
like these films. Yeah.
Trust them. Did you ever get into any of those Tetsuo movies? I'm long
Oh, I
overdue.
love Tetsuo. Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems like those were carried by the label. I recently saw A Snake in June, which was just such a creepy psychological thriller, just like so Hitchcockian. And it's like the guy who made it was like mentored by Akira Kurosawa.
Oh, wow.
That got that far back, yeah. But it really is pretty creepy. You can rent it on a few different platforms, but yeah, it's just so uncomfortable. Just all these photos this person is sending, and then you're even unsure as to who is the actual stalker after a while. It's not really scary, but there's a few creepy moments in there, inevitably. And
I appreciate that. I like a good mystery thriller.
it's a good mystery thriller, but yeah, by the second part of it, it's definitely psychological horror.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think like of all the subgenres, that's my favorite. Just because, like we talked about, I like how much it just messes with you, and how much depth there is and complexity.
Totally.
And also, I also think, I was watching. It's very similar. I was watching Tale of Two Sisters, and I noticed one of the things about it is that, obviously it's so I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's a ghost story, and there are supernatural scares, but at its core, the really terrifying part is the real life horror. The human drama, the how terrible people can be, and loss and grief and psychological torture, and it's and I love that. I love films that are really like, sure, like ghosts are cool and zombies and all that stuff, but the most terrifying thing is the human mind and what it's capable of, and trauma and all of that. So it's
especially music. Music can really break a film, and when you got a horror film that just does that, it's like, no, you really got to be very suspenseful with this.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because that's one of my like favorite aspects of these films. I think the scores are usually so freaking good. I think that's one of the reasons that I always feel so tense and uncomfortable the whole time. It's just they're just so well scored.
Yeah.
At least some of the ones that I've seen that I'm really a big fan of.
And some of these at times they're essentially, they almost feel like this is a foreign version of like Wishmaster, Hellraiser, or The Omen. It's like they'll always have just like some cop going insane, or someone's soul being taken, like a body snatcher, or
Yeah,
what could easily be a typical X-Files episode, and even more just gruesome and nightmarish.
yeah, it's I was doing a little bit of research before this podcast about I know, right? I'm such a nerd. Just about like how the label came about, and sort of where, because I was trying to refresh my memory, like, okay, when did this start?
UK
I knew
based.
Yeah, and the founder, I read that the founder, the reason that he started the label, and I just thought this was really great, and I wanted to share it. So
Thank you.
the story was that like one weekend at the end of 1999, he watched 2 Japanese films on video and was totally blown away by them. And the 2 films that he watched back to back were Ringu and Audition.
Ooh,
and then,
yeah. That was
which
the
is a
tip of the iceberg.
Great introduction. And then later on, he came across, which feels very similar to kind of my journey. He came across Thai and South Korean titles, Bangkok, Dangerous, and Nowhere to Hide, which he found outrageously shocking. And he said, this is his quote, he said, "When I realized that these films were not one-offs and that there was a constant flow of brilliant films coming out of Asia, I decided to brand it and make it Asia Extreme." And I just sort of love that story about how, like, that personal connection and him watching these films and being like, holy shit, and then making a whole label out of it.
Not being a Weinstein where he just hacks it up and then sells it to the highest bidder, or where he takes all the credit for it. Is like, no, I got my resources, so I'm going to distribute these because I'm sure someone else will like it, and I'll make money from the American sales, but I'll also be providing the exclusive avenue for these. Because it was like, for the longest time, if you wanted to get these movies, you recorded them off of the movie channels. It's like, people forget how expensive videotapes were. They were not meant for massive consumption like they were midway through the 90s. They were meant for the video stores to buy and sell or rent.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that it's, for Tartan, it wasn't just about access, because at the time, access was starting to open up with the region free players, and distribution was getting a little bit better, but it was about the mainstream viability of it and making it front and center and making everyday horror fans familiar with these titles.
And they did a good job getting exclusive festival interviews and commentary tracks by historians as well as the filmmakers, especially like Q&As. Sometimes they'd even put on a music video. I definitely saw one of them and I was like, wow, that's creepy. Putting it in, with the music video. Some of the stuff that made it into the trailer and some of the stuff that's very exclusive to the movie is like, man, we don't get that graphic with our music videos. We sexualize them or have bleeped out profanity, but we don't have gore or scary segments from the movies put into the music video that it's promoting.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool.
Of the ones I have not yet seen that are in my collection are Vital, which is by the Tetsuo director, and they said this is very Cronenberg, David Lynch like. And then there was The Maid, which I think is a South Korean entry, if I'm not mistaken.
The Maid is supposed to be I haven't seen The Maid. It is also on Tubi if anybody is interested. It is supposed to be one of the better ones for sure.
Oh, not the 2021. Like, this is an older one.
No, I know. Yes, no, I know what you're talking about.
Cool.
No, God, no.
Haven't seen that one yet, but that one's also a Thailand one. When did this one come out? This was like earlier. Let me see.
Yeah, I think most of these are like in the.
It was
most of the
from
big ones
Singapore.
are like
My bad.
2000 to 2010. Yeah.
Yeah, my bad. 2005 is when this came out, and as an opera family with many secrets. Okay. But no, I'll suggest one that I really think you'll dig, that I think everyone will mostly dig.
Yeah.
Because it's very psychological, and this is from 2001, and it is none other than Sorum. I'm saying it right.
I haven't seen that one.
Okay,
Tell me a little bit about that one.
Okay, so this is a South Korean one, and I couldn't believe it was the guy's first movie he ever did, because I was like, no, like this does not feel like a first timer. This feels like someone's been waiting to talk about.
Yeah.
It's distributed by Buena Vista, but yeah, we mostly got it through Tartan Asia label, and it just has this taxi driver, and before you can say, taxi driver, he just basically, he's being driven by the insanity in his apartment, and just, it's everything from just weird noises to he thinks he's hearing people kill each other and other shit, and TVs are up too loud. It basically gets that whole echoes of people in a crappy rundown apartment complex. But the dialogue is really witty with how it starts out, and just how he walks around. You're like saying, you look like shit, and he's like, I don't look any worse than the shithole I live in. Or the people I drive. Dread Central called it a slow burn and effective subtle horror, but it definitely gets pretty gruesome, especially with the toilet full of blood near the end. Not to give it too much away, but it does even get even more chaotic. It's like, wow, did he kill that person, or did he find someone else murdered in one place? It's like, It just feel, and I would have to watch it again to just really get a sense of where did he go insane. What was the normal him versus the him that went, lost his shit. And was it a possessed spirit that took him over? I don't know. It's there's a lot to think about, and definitely like most of these movies where there's like a lot of open-ended stuff, but you never feel cheated.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I love when it's not spoon-fed and that you actually get to kind of come to your own conclusions. And I love films where you have to kind of go back and rewatch it, because you watch it the first time, you're like, wait, shit, like, did I catch everything? Like, I don't know if I know exactly what happened. And then you go back and rewatch it, and then it starts to, every time you rewatch it, like, more and more unravels, and then you eventually realize like how brilliantly crafted it is.
And you're always just unsure of who to feel sorry for. Like in this case, the taxi driver just bitches about this old man who everyone hates, and he died mysteriously, and yet everyone just is like, the smells of death, or if you think this place is haunted, And
yeah, I feel like Asian horror does a really good job of that, of like, there isn't a lot of black and white. It's not like, oh, here's the good guy and the bad guy. There's a lot of just like, everyone is shades of gray. And I think that that's part of what makes it so compelling, because obviously that's real life. We don't have like clear cut, like, this is the protagonist, this is the antagonist. Like, we're all both,
tons of gray.
Yeah. Which I think is really, really cool. I was when I was looking at sort of how some of these films were originally received, one of the things that I noticed that really struck a chord with me, I was talking about how much I love gore and visceral violence and stuff, which isn't, I mean, it's not for everyone, I get it, but I really appreciate it. And I like art house horror too. Like, I'm a big
I'm fine
A24
with anything
fan.
as long as it's earned, and
for sure.
And if it's like okay, so yes, there's gonna be someone who just is whiny about this one way or the other. Is like, just be consistent in your tone. That's all I ask. Don't be like, am I supposed to be disturbed by this? Am I supposed to laugh at this, over the top violence? It's a horror comedy. What's going on? And I think Americans, we're just so bad at it, because it's like, there's just so many people who will just kind of just force in the gore and just kill any sense of their suspense. And it's just like, so I don't know what you're going for, but it's definitely not the way to proceed.
There's definitely gore for gore's sake, and where it does feel cheap and it doesn't feel integral to the story, and it doesn't like serve any purpose other than like,
or it's just a music video guy and they don't know how to actually convey some kind of an emotion. It's just kind of all on loop, and it's like, well, now you're just putting me to sleep or just grossing me out. But you can deliberately gross a person out, but you got to really plan it. And like, I feel like I'm at one with the victim, and I want them to either escape or see, or if it's a bad person and they're being served into hell, is like, I want to see them, be served their comeuppance.
I was gonna say, there is that difference between, because sometimes I watch gore and I'm noticing the practical effects and I'm appreciating that, but I'm looking at it on a different level. I'm just noticing it, I guess, detached. I'm watching it going, oh, that gore is really cool. And then there's other films where, there's other films where I feel everything that's happening. And those are really hard for me to watch, because I feel this empathy and I get very invested in it. It's very painful to watch. And then I'm no longer focused on the gore. I'm focused on like the suffering and the pain, and those are, I think, probably certainly better done films. And the films that last with you, but those are also like the hardest for me to watch when I'm watching it, and just extremely invested in what's happening and feeling for the character and feeling every like slice of the knife. That's where because it's not the gore. The gore doesn't bother me at all. I don't care about the blood and guts. I care about the suffering.
Well, that's just it too. It's just like, sometimes you don't know if, it's part of the torture porn genre, or if it's also like just a legit kind of like Hellraiser, where it's like the person's trapped in the equivalent of Dante's Inferno. It's like, okay, I'll bite, because there's some there's some thought being put to this. It's not just, faces of death, where I'm feeling like I'm seeing an actual person die. And that was a documentary, so that's even scarier.
Yeah.
But But there are
So-
some good ones where it's like there is like I felt like someone actually died that was very well done, and that put me in the seat of the spectacle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, I mean, these films, a lot of these films, you know, like when we talk about Audition and Old Boy, they get so much like the buzz is all around like how shocking it is and how violent and stuff. But I mean, as we mentioned, they're
The reviews are
really
really bad at
beautifully
spoiling.
well done. Well, yeah, I read a review, so I wanted to share this because this really like made the hair on my arm stand up. So I read this review from New York Times, and it's about Old Boy. And it reminded me, I'm going to draw a parallel afterwards about something that happened recently. So the review says, the snippet says, the fact that Old Boy is embraced by some cinephiles is symptomatic of a bankrupt, reductive postmodernism, one that promotes a spurious aesthetic relativism and finds its crudest expression in the hermetically sealed world of fanboys, which is incredibly insulting. And it's very similar to, I remember when Spiral came out recently. The director Darren Bousman posted on Instagram that he also got, I believe it was also New York Times, he got a review that basically said anyone who like this is garbage, and anyone who watches this doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. They're morally bankrupt. They're, you know, these torture porn fans, which torture porn is such a that's such a reductive phrase and so insulting, really, the way that it's used generally.
It often is
And,
insulting.
yeah,
I think my problem is I think Saw just kind of when it came out. Obviously, there's a lot who like it, and that's fine. They can like it. It's hard to find which ones kind of feel inventive. Like I think Cube kind of did it better, where it was this kind of just showing people trapped in a maze trying to escape, and various, you know, people get dispatched or killed in the maze, so to speak. But there's some of them is like they definitely feel like snuff. Spiral, it's a whole different kind of movie. It's not even really like take out the origin story. It's barely what I would call related to even Saw. It's just a silly serial killer movie.
Well, you know, one of the things that I was getting at is that what Darren said, which I appreciated, was that like, okay, listen, if you don't like this film, that is totally fair and fine, and it's fair criticism to say like, I thought the film was garbage. He's like, I can take it. This isn't for everyone. He's like, what I don't like is when you insult the fans, when you insult people who like this kind of film. And
Many critics are very outspoken and pretend to speak for everyone, and it doesn't get any more helpful when you got ones like Slant or Slate who kind of play up the whole "we're gonna roast someone." I'm like, well, it's not a review then; it's a roast.
It really, yeah. I just find that I don't like when somebody takes a whole, you know, subgenre of horror and just reduces it to its base levels and says, oh, this is torture porn, and all that it is about is, you know, the gore and the shocks, and there is nothing redeeming to any of this. Now, are there films that fall into that category? Absolutely. But to say a film like Old Boy falls into that category, I find very offensive and horrifying, because I'm like, listen,
not
if
even
you
Lady
don't
Vengeance.
like, Lady Vengeance is beautiful. Like I you know, and it's very similar. Like a lot of people have a lot of problems with rape revenge films, which I totally get. I get the problem with it. But I also think, you know, I argue this a lot on my other podcasts.
It's kind of like subgenres, you know?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say this isn't for me. That's fair criticism to say like, this does not float my boat. But to say, and therefore it is objectively bad, or it is garbage, and anybody who likes it is, there's something wrong with them. That's where I have a real problem. I'm like, no, you don't get to make generalized statements about the type of people who watch these films because you have a negative experience with a film or with, you know, certain type of content.
I mean, there's some very demented exploitation films, but I think that's the other thing too. I mean, I can think of maybe some biker movies that are very upsetting because there's just nothing but, you know, people getting killed and raped. But then there's some other ones where it's like, well, the filmmakers know what they're making. So I think it's just it's like, it's someone already over speaking, and then sometimes it's hard to tell if they're just responding because the filmmakers did a good job at freaking them out or getting emotion from them, or if they really were just that insulted by it, but they didn't know how to phrase it better without insulting other people and acting like, oh, you guys, or anyone else who likes this is also a sadist or rapist or sicko.
Yeah. It's funny. Like that actually reminds me. Tartan released Irreversible.
Oh, good,
you?
very good example. Very good example.
And it is. I think about that one a
Guster.
lot, where people are like, okay, all rape, like any film that shows a brutal rape scene is inherently awful and misogynistic and terrible. Like I understand why people don't want to see that, and I'm a feminist and I get it, but also like that film is so fucking brilliant. I hope I can cuss on this. I'm sorry if not. But
We're totally gonna curse.
It's so good, and I feel like a scene like that, if you removed it from the film, it would not be the same film. It would not have the same impact. It would be, it's critical. It's important. It's not. It's not glorifying in any way. It's not gratuitous. It is instrumental to the story. And
arguing gratuitousness is also a lost cause with people half the time. It's like, okay, so this will be gratuitous or that won't be gratuitous. I once got in a argument with my film buff cousins and aunt. And it was just like, oh, that's, what was it? I think we were talking about just violence in movies in general. It's just like, so it's like I was showing them a violent crime show as well as a war movie, and they're like, well, I don't want, that's disturbing because that's meant to be realistic. Oh, Lord of the Rings is fantasy. I'm like, Lord of the Rings, in my opinion, is way more over the top violent than any of these comparisons, but to each their own. I mean, I think that's just it. We're just getting, it's not even subjective anymore. Now it's even just, do we even know what you're about to watch? Because it seems like some people went to movies like that just to be offended. It's just like, okay, this is, Irreversible is way more of a Roman Polanski, Hitchcock type movie, with horror and mystery elements,
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and lie. Like, okay, I love that film, and I love that filmmaker, and I know he's controversial, and I know he's not for everyone.
Knows what he's making. I mean, Into the Void, if you haven't seen, you pretty much know that he knows what he's making. He makes just very graphic, basically feels like you're just
but beautiful.
Dreams. Yeah, no, beautiful
really,
tragedies, yeah.
But I was reading that, like, I mean, obviously for Irreversible, the censors were like, because it's a 9-minute rape scene, and they were like, no, thank you, like, you're not doing this. And he like fought tooth and nail to keep that intact, because he was basically like, if you take this out, this film is pointless. This is critical, and he got it kept in, which is like, it's like
change a
one
few
of his
things, and it's like, Jesus, yeah,
that's one of his like greatest achievements, and I feel like.
I mean, the actress knew what she was making. The other actors definitely knew what they were making. It was like, this is not something to take lightly. And at the same time, I mean, it's not like it was going to be a wide release. This was going to play at your local art house cinema, because that's where most foreign films do get played.
It's definitely niche. I remember I saw Climax at a film festival.
Oh, wow.
And and I freaking loved it. But I remember I wrote a review afterwards, and I said, my only thought is, and I went and I talked about how much I loved it and why I loved it, but I was like, I did have that thought of like, God help anyone who doesn't know what they're getting into, who isn't familiar with this work, who didn't know what to expect if they like stumbled into it. Because a lot of times when you're at a film festival, especially this was Fantastic Fest, and there's so many films, and I don't like to watch a lot of trailers or get a lot of information. So sometimes I'm making decisions based on, sometimes you're making decisions based on very little information. You're like, that sounds interesting. And I'm like, if you go into a film like Irreversible, you do not know what you're getting into, I can understand going like that. I am somebody who really likes extreme horror, and that film messed me up. Like, it was hard to watch, but I thought it was brilliant. Afterwards, I was like, holy shit, I'll never forget this film.
I thought it got going in the second half, but I don't know. I don't feel like it could top Irreversible or Into the Void. But it definitely is I was talking
about Irreversible, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about Climax. It's like Climax,
no, I would say sorry.
That I would say that's a starting point. But
Climax is messed up in a different way. I mean, it's just, I think you just have to, his filmmaking is so singular, and he's got such a distinct style that it's either for you or it's not.
And I'm seeing other people talk about, movies that don't use any cutaways. I'm like, guys, they've had movies like that for years.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the problem, is that people are not exposed to enough foreign horror, which I think is where all the really, I hate to say, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't like reduce American horror, because there's some really good American horror, obviously, but
I think
I
you could
feel
just
like
say people go by what they've heard or what they've seen parodies
Yeah.
of. And it's like, but how many of these have you actually seen? You know,
I just think there's so much innovative, really brilliant, really inspiring stuff happening in other countries that enough American audiences aren't exposed to and aren't seeking it out, and there's not enough access to it. Even in this day and age of streaming, it's not there's not a lot of readily available stuff for people to watch to really explore all this amazing horror from different countries. So that, and I'm hoping with like Squid Game success that maybe some of that will start to change, and
I
we'll
think they're
start
figuring
to
out the
have more
streaming
of that.
platform.
Yeah.
You know, now that they got Shudder, now that they got what's the other one? It's like a newer one. I mean, Peacock is trying some new things. I have no doubt that there's everyone's going to basically have someone for everybody, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of hopefully they get better at just advertising this stuff, because it used to be word of mouth, then there used to be just kind of just in studio stuff, and now, you know, they hire people to do all this stuff, and it seems like these people, whoever they are either getting bored and just going to the first shocking scene they find in the movie or something, because it's like you're either giving it all away or you are totally misrepresenting the movie. There are a bunch of people going into movies that they expect to see as a horror movie, and it turns out it's just a mystery thriller with one shocking moment. I'm like, well, you lied to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with Tartan, though, is it's not just about, and one thing they were so good at is it's not just about availability. Like, it's not about can you actually see these films if you want to. It's about knowing they exist and having exposure to them, and knowing, you know, having it be like front and center and something that mainstream audiences can find and discover and appreciate, which there has been very little of outside of what Tartan did, you know,
I'm
during
sure
that decade.
Yeah, I think they're bound to play around with it at this point. I mean, Blumhouse is doing a bunch of movies each year, each Halloween with Amazon. There's a few other ones that seem to, you know, doesn't take much for a filmmaker to even just start up like a bunch of anthologies. Like, everyone's in on it, you know. And you know, the minute anyone says, you know, Jordan Peele or probably someone like no, I mean, if someone said David Lynch or even Ari Aster, you know, people would be just flocking to that. I think, if anything, I mean, Tartan Asia was just kind of just leading the horror parade, but then there were just other studios, like, we're so used to other ones now, like Vinegar Syndrome, and then you know, Shout Factory has also the horror label Scream Factory, but then there's just a few other Blu-ray companies that are just making it their mission to just help people find just rare cinema. And it's like, and that these producers are, you know, maxing out their credit card accounts. They are making sure is like, okay, I'm going to make sure it looks good, and we give you different cuts of it. And we got, you know, if we can't get anyone involved with it, you know, to do a 5-minute interview, then we'll at least get a film historian who has some inside information, or talk to some studio producer who knew about this, you know, or give you some story notes. Don't you think
bless them.
Speaking of music earlier, do you think it's so surreal now how so many of these movies have like an isolated like music score that you can play? Have you seen that? I've seen them do that with some movies now.
You mean like on the Blu-ray release?
Yeah. Like, it used to be, it was just the menu and you just played it on loop, but it's like, no, you can download the soundtrack now, and it's like, I've seen them do that with some of those zombie movies and giallo films, and I'm like, that is something now.
Well, even I love, like we were talking about before we started, I love physical media, but one of the things that I like is with the rise of these, you know, all these cool films being released by companies like Vinegar Syndrome and Severin Films, where people are discovering all these things for the first time on this beautiful restoration, but also like the rise of vinyl coming back, and these companies releasing these scores on vinyl is something that makes my heart very happy. And so talking about music, and because some of those, like you talked about giallos and stuff, like those soundtracks are so exquisite.
Yeah.
And being able to have access to those is pretty amazing.
Oh, hell. Even I was listening to a few other friends of our shows, sci-fi and horror podcasts, even their action podcasts where they were interviewing celebrities, and they interviewed one producer, and he was like, people look at me like I'm crazy when I say, hey, I got a DVD or a Blu-ray, I can bring it to your house. And they're like, oh, but it's not on streaming. So it's like, I think, yeah, there's some people who are definitely, if they're not being snobby, then they're just being lazy. And it's like, there's no shame in hooking up, you know, it doesn't even have to be 4K, but it's like, whatever the option is, just make it happen. And it doesn't have to be an arguing match about how you see it, you know. You can see it that way, you see it. But it's like,
you have a whole generation now who like is the post-blockbuster generation, you know, that doesn't even like physical media isn't even a thing. They don't,
or they're bitter about it. Oh, I hated the rental store. I'm like, well, there's plenty of good rental stores, and it's like, don't. Netflix was an online rental place before it was the online rental and streaming place. So it's like,
we used to I live in Austin, Texas, and we used to have a couple of
I'm a Dallas guy. So.
Oh, that's where I'm from, actually. That's my place of birth. But we used to have two really kick-ass mom and pop type video stores that I loved and went to all the time. And during COVID, they both shut down, and I cried. I was so upset because now we don't have anything. And that was one of the reasons I loved my city. Is I was like, oh shit, we have all this cool stuff, and I would go all the time, and I would rent VHS. And
you can find some Criterions at amazing thrift stores, but yeah, it's like you got to look in the most unusual place if you want to find something. And like you say, is like, yeah, the mom and pop stores are still around here, and pretty much will be, because they're kind of like family video. And it's just like it's like there's something for everybody. There's the discount section, here's the buying section, and then we got a few light rentals. But a lot of those stores just had to just say, hey, you know, we're taking some time off and waiting for the panic to die down before we open up again. And I hope those mom and pop stores open back up. There's one right by me called On Video, and I tried to apply for it multiple times, and it became pretty clear either he didn't want to pay anyone to be a clerk at the store, but it had some really awesome like different rental plans, and that's what really wowed me, in addition to just having a huge ass library. Like it was free to 5 giant rows, and that's all the store consisted of. And I was like, see, I like that. And it's like, because that's in your face, you know instantly what you're walking into, as opposed to, you know, having to worry about what section you go to. Is like, no, this is pretty convenient because this is by a gas station and everything. I don't know if it's still open, but I'll have to check next time I will drive by there. And
it makes me sad that there are people who will never experience what it's like to walk into a video store and see all the like VHS covers and just have that experience of picking out a film in that way, and not just like clicking on Netflix and being scrolling and figuring out what's on. I mean, it's hard to explain when you try to explain to someone why that's such a immersive experience. They don't understand. You can't really comprehend until you do it. But if you walk into a video store, the
same thing
exist,
like a record store is like,
store, same thing. You're right. It's like there is something so, and maybe it's just because I'm old and I remember it, but like there's something so magical about it that
and then they want to complain about how the digital copy looks. I'm like, well, different streaming sites have different rights to different versions. So yeah, you might have a movie that's a dubbed version or a little less resolution. You know, it's like you should know. It's like they just want to take on any invite to complain about anything. And it's like, well, if you really cared all that much about watching this, you could have done some research beforehand and see what is the best version of the movie to watch. You know, it's like, do I do the Blu-ray or do I do Amazon Prime? Do I do Tubi or do I do, you know, the discounted DVD set from 2007? You know, it's like, it's out there. This is all a click away just as much as it is. And I don't know. I think, like you say, people like to be disappointed, and they just, if they didn't go to the store or even a library in some cases, they just figured, because I don't know about it, it doesn't matter. It's like, you should know about various trends. You know, it's like before we had conventions, we had just, you know, circuses. So I mean,
Yeah, it is crazy because there's certain, I guess I maybe because I'm so immersed in the genre, and it's what I mean, I'm very actively involved. I guess I should say I run a horror website, and so, um, I I think maybe for me that just feel like when I talk to people who are like, yeah, I'm a horror fan, and then I start talking to them and they are not familiar with pretty much anything outside of like what dropped on Netflix. I'm like, oh, and not to judge, but I guess maybe I'm like, I guess I'm weird just because I'm so immersed in it, but it feels strange to me when people don't know certain things.
The exact same experience with both comedy fans. You know, they're just going with like the latest stand-up. I'm like, stand-up has been around for years. How familiar are you with stand-up? And same thing with the sketch show guys. It's like they're just only familiar with like the current season of SNL. I'm like, oh, get the hell out of here. You know? Everyone's got their favorite, and I'm not going to do the whole this season's the best or worst because like that's all apples and oranges. But even the same thing with sci-fi is like, well, what kind of sci-fi's? You know, psychological sci-fi, cyberpunk, you know, sci-fi, and then I have to explain those kinds of versions. Like, okay, shit, we're gonna be here a while. Star Trek kind of sci-fi, Forbidden Planet, you know, sci-fi. What?
Yeah, and maybe it is because I am a research nerd, but like I feel like if you're going to say like I'm a horror fan, but you don't care about foundational horror, you don't care about the roots, you don't care about what inspired the current filmmakers,
or why it was scary, why people talked about it, is like the most they'll probably go is like there's even people who don't even know about the real life War of the Worlds, where, you know, Orson Welles talked on the radio and everyone shit their pants, you know, listening to it. You know, that whole kind of scenario is kind of gone. I'm seeing people react to Joe Bob, but I don't know how many of them, you know, are longtime viewers versus they're just now getting into them. Same thing kind of with Mystery Science Theater. And it's like, you realize there's been so many local horror hosts for years before we had Elvira and Svengoolie, you know, so
it's true. I am grateful that I'm really grateful for shows like Joe Bob because it is introducing this younger crowd to like films they would never in a million years would have watched otherwise.
Right. It would be those all kinds of different movies where it's like, I'll watch this when the kids aren't home. I'll maybe get that if there's only 5 other people in the store and they don't see me check out with it, you know?
Yeah.
Stuff that you would always wait for the pay channels to play. And it's like, jeez.
It's fun to see because, like, if you watch shows like that and there's a lot of live tweeting going on, so people are reacting in real time.
That's the other thing, too, is like, they didn't have a choice. That all these writers is like, they got their work cut out for them because now they can instantly say, oh, kill off that annoying character, or don't have any of those scenes. Those aren't, the comedy in them isn't working, or those aren't that scary. So it's like they have all this instant feedback, and it's like that was unheard of. It's like they didn't hear until years later when they had annoying questions at a convention, you know, at Horror Hound or Comic-Con.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate the way that brings back communal viewing and making it an event, and everybody is sort of experiencing something at the same time. And when
they're seeing the reactions and they're legit and they're like,
and it's stuff that I've loved for a long time, but people are like, holy shit, it's the first time they've even heard of it. They're being exposed to all this stuff that was not on the radar at all, and they're blown away. And my hope is that they watch stuff like that and they're like, well, now I want to see more of this, and then they go out and they seek out more stuff like that. So
just wait till you dig up a Joe Bob recording or an MST3K recording, and you're having to explain to people what a PO box is. And it's like, seriously, we still have that even.
Yeah.
But no one sends letters unless they really legit want to show that, you know, like, you did something special for me, so I'm going to send you a thank you in a letter form. Yeah, it's like to have to write all these various people. I mean, there's people who still answer their fan mail. And it's just, I don't know, people don't use it as much because, you know, maybe their website shut down, you know, or glitched on Wix.com or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, it still exists, guys. I guarantee you, if you ask their agent, they will happily give you, you know, the mailing address.
Yeah, it's funny. This is a total aside, somewhat related, but I do my day job is marketing, and one of the things like
Nice.
yeah, it's super exciting. One of the trends that we're seeing is that for the longest time, like nobody wanted to do anything through the mail because that was like old school, and everything was email and digital. And so there was this huge everything had to be digital, and people invested all their money and resource in that.
I
And
know, right?
now the old school stuff is like coming, like people got so oversaturated and burned out, and they got their email boxes got so full that if you send a mailer now, people are like, shit, what's this? And it's like now this novel thing that is getting huge results just because it's different and it's shaking things up. And
So different. And I
yeah,
think that's with every trend. I think we're now at a standstill where they realize they've oversaturated every single market. I mean, I remember when video on demand followed by a limited release was a first kind of becoming a thing around 06, 07. And now it's like second nature now, especially during
yeah.
the pandemic when they just said, fuck it. You want it now? Pay $20 on the nearest platform and you'll get it.
Yeah,
waiting for the mail.
I really struggled with that because I'm such a theater girl. Like I really am all about the theatrical experience, and
I do like a good movie. I think my problem was it's just theaters just were so far away from me for whatever I wanted to see that was being played, or it's just I was going to theaters with lesser Foley, and it's like, yeah, I'll just wait for an AMC airing or Angelica screening of this with a Q&A of the guy. But no, that's so surreal too. And I'm a security guard. That's my day job. And I just find it so funny how everyone marketing is another one where everyone over exaggerates. They either act like it's an instant, you will really like this, or it's really hard. It's like, no, it's basically wired for the right person. And same thing with security. It's like most people like me, we want a job where we can get in, get out, observe some things, take photos, and, relax, and then clock out. And unfortunately, that's been so popularized in movies. Everyone thinks, oh, a security guard, so you're going to get shot by a bank robber or killed by a killer, eaten by a giant monster, It's like, no. I'm guarding a medical lab. I'm pretty sure there's not going to be a bunch of zombies that, come out and eat me.
No, I mean, that sounds pretty cool. Like when I say I'm in marketing, people are like, oh God. It's like saying you're a lawyer, except for.
I know. They
it's
act like
there's
boring office job. Oh, no.
Yeah, they're like, oh,
you're fooling
part
me.
of the problem. And I'm like, yes, I am part of the problem. Thanks.
You put up that awful sexist looking billboard. I'm like, no, it's just sex and advertising. And yes, I was hired to post that and figure out how to get the person's attention and have them buy it. You're welcome.
Yeah, I think it's always fun when people blame, it's the advertisers that are creating this culture and putting stuff out into the market that is harmful. They're selling sex, whatever that may be, and then that's not the kind of marketing I do. But then I always
I didn't think so.
As a marketer, I'm like, but I also know that it's all about supply and demand. Like marketers only respond to what consumers want. That's the whole goal. The goal is to put something out there that consumers will respond to. And so if as consumers we responded differently to different things, that's what we would get. We would get whatever we respond to. So all the stuff that we're being fed that we think is disgusting,
you pick your clients,
is the stuff that we want.
And you pick what kind of marketing you're good at. It's like, hey, I can do the shoe ad, or I can do the giant business ad, I can do the restaurant ad. And yeah, I mean, the same thing with here. Definitely with my job is like, what kind of places do we guard? Is like, we're not going to do any of the HEB stuff. We're going to guard just simple, small little clinics and shared, strip malls. It's like, and like you say, I do think, yes, I think we're just still surrounded by toxic culture that just seems to want to just start flame wars. And it's like the internet was fine but then now there's a reason IMDb not too long ago closed down its forums. Like they got tired of it after a while. It's like, this is not what you're here for. You are here to rank, review, and share your nostalgia, and you're just deciding we're having to hire all these extra people to respond to all these people we got to ban. And now we got just so many other people who it seems like you can choose to do a site that has a lot of shocking, ads and, articles, but then there's, you can market it a different way where it's like, you won't believe this. And it's like, that can keep it more neutral as opposed to this is clickbait or this is a tragic, very unhappy story.
Yeah, it's another thing like clickbait, because clickbait makes me freaking crazy.
Especially because everyone now does that. They're like, oh, so and so is out of a career. I'm like, no, they've just taken time off. Where'd you read that? Oh, I went to Nikki Swift. Well, Nikki Swift is like Paris Hilton and all those other, shitheads who, make shit up.
Yeah.
And sometimes TMZ will even link it to the other two. They don't care.
Well, yeah, because it's like, it's so easy to be like, that's so gross. Like, everybody says it's gross. No, I don't think I've ever met anybody that's like, I love clickbait. Like, we all hate it, or we think we hate it.
And yet we get sucked into them, sometimes by accident, because there's a sister company using it, and you're like, God damn it, I got suckered in again.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, the only reason people do it is because it works, and it's really the only thing that works. Like, because, again, like running a website, it's like you can create the most compelling, amazing content that's really like authentic and thoughtful, but if nobody reads it, then you're like, well, I mean, it's great, like I'm obviously doing stuff with integrity, but also it would be nice if people read it, and then you see the stuff that people do read, and you see the headlines, and you see how like most of it's like kind of poorly written, and it's all about just getting the clicks because it's all about the advertisers, and so the content stops mattering. But it's a vicious cycle, because it's like you almost have to do it if you want stuff seen, but then it's like, well, then now there's no integrity in the stuff, so what's the point? I really struggle with that quite a bit.
For sure. And I mean, when I started this podcast, I noticed the episodes that didn't have as good a sound quality, or the ones I put very less time and effort into, they got more clicks just the subject alone. Someone was searching for that in whatever podcast feed. And so I was like, well, shit. So it's a bit of everything. It's about, like you say, the branding, have a good logo that doesn't, hurt someone's eyes or just look like a bad Photoshop, have a good panel, and then, have a good title that doesn't make it hard for it to pop up in some feed or whatever have you. And stop saying no. It seems like so many people just say, no, I don't understand what you even asked me to do. But no. Not doing that.
What do you mean? Like, elaborate.
Like they'll I'm sure you get this even at your job. You give some solid, just decent advice, harmless advice, and you're instantly met with a no. And you're like, and it's like, you don't know if the person just didn't like how you said it versus how you promoted that idea to them versus they just didn't want any feedback. It's like, duly noted, fuck off. It's like, what? Did you even hear what I said?
No. People tend to jump right to the like thinking of objections, thinking of why something won't work. It's like whenever I do, like at work, if we do like creative brainstormings and stuff, and you always have to have that rule of like, there's no bad ideas at the brainstorming stage. The brainstorming stage is all about like, throw it out there and see we'll figure out the logistics of it later, but that's how great ideas get generated. Is stop saying, like you said, don't say no, don't put up the blocks or the walls, just immediately accept everything as plausible and doable, and then figure out how to do it. Kind
of like all those tells. Have you heard of the tells about certain movies or TV shows that had particular writers' rooms, some which were agreeable and some which weren't? And it's like some people felt like they made their career on that, but they had just no fond memory of it. So they just said, hey, don't take this the wrong way, but I hated my time there.
Well, sure, because the second like toxicity enters the room, it's like all passion and energy goes out. The second somebody is like, that's stupid, you don't want to share any ideas, you're not excited about anything, you're just
fuck
like,
you.
It sucks that that's our natural tendency. Like, you have to like train your brain to not do that. Because when somebody says, oh, we should get a blimp and you're immediately like, okay, that's fucking stupid. You know how much that costs? Like, that's what we're trained to do. And so to not do that, you have to really work at it.
Fortunately, I've been on some independent and amateur film productions, and I was always just like, well, no idea is bad. We just got to figure out how we're going to show it. And unfortunately, most of the people, they don't even know how it should display on screen, or what they want is like, yeah, I doubt this could work because you already don't even know how many shots you'll use, what you'll cast, or even how much your budget is going to go to. Is like, so this is already kind of sounding like it's going to be a failure, because it's like you got to plan all of this. You know what happens naturally. And then there were too many people who was like, I must stick to the script. I was like, the line doesn't make sense, it doesn't work. Fine, I'll hire someone who does. I'm like, someone is still going to ask you, unless they don't care and they'll take any kind of work, or they're just beginning and they're just as ego driven as you. It's like, so many people even just feel like everything must be explicitly shown on screen. It's like, well, and this goes back to, again, yes, horror is like, use one location, especially if you're just beginning. You know, it's going to get too hard to get everything. It's like, use some good Foley, use some of the shocks can be in the person's mind, and just music score to kind of invite them to go down the alleyway. And then, yes, then the other stuff that you want to explicitly show, get a really good makeup artist and effects person.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I love indie horror. Like, low budget indie horror is my jam. And it's not for everyone, but one of the things that I love
There's
about
some
it so
good
much
ones.
is that, like, well, I think having no money and no resources, if you're good, it forces creativity. And some of the best stuff is done because, like, on my podcast, we just talked about a film called Pontypool. I don't know if you've seen it.
That's a good one.
Canadian,
Very good example.
And it's a great example of, like, okay, we don't have any money, but they use that to their advantage, and they wrote a script around, like, a central location and a reason to not see a lot of it and to make it work. Like, me and my co-host were talking about how amazing it is that for a good chunk of the film, it's just people talking, and somehow it's riveting and terrifying and super investing, and that's creativity, filmmaking creativity at its best.
So wild.
And yeah,
how
there's
it
a lot of crap,
feels
but
Cronenberg, but yet he wasn't involved, and yet it has what's his name, Stephen
So
McCaddy,
good.
who's been in some of his films.
it's so good. And that's rare. That's not obviously I watch a lot of low budget indie stuff.
We're gonna have to exchange
not
some
great.
low budget vampire and zombie films with each other and just say, watch this, don't watch
Yeah,
that.
oh my god. I have a long list of films that I love.
All right, for sure.
Really good stuff. Yeah.
And there are ones that just stand out just because either they had a sense of fun or
Mm-hmm.
it really was organized. And I really do get annoyed when people want to just try and instantly look, how much money was it? I'm like, it doesn't matter. There's plenty of them that had 5 million and they still had overexposed lighting and that worked or didn't. But I think that's just it too. It's like, if you never knew otherwise, why would you care?
Yeah.
I'll actually, well, when we share some zombie films with each other, I'll share you one is like, I never would have known was filmed for 5,000 because it didn't look it, but it was good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously that's the goal, right? Is to, like, make a film where you're not instantly, like, screaming, oh yeah, this is low budget, because that's not what the exciting part isn't that it's, like, low budget. The exciting part is that, like, okay, we didn't have resources, but we made that work. We used that to our advantage, and we did something where it didn't matter that we didn't have millions of dollars. We didn't need it because we had this amazing script and we had this really great cast and we had, like, this really cool idea, and it's really well shot,
in
you
pop
know?
culture.
Yeah.
People are now referencing it. Even cartoons on Adult Swim are talking about it. So it's like, yeah, it's like there's something for everybody, but it does also get a little annoying too. Is like, what kind of a low budget are you thinking of? Like, already there's a bunch of horror comedies that are being filmed around the Texas, Oklahoma, and LA area. I've seen a few of those. No, I haven't seen the movies. I've just seen that they're in production. They're sharing behind the scenes. It's like Debbie Rokon is kind of a icon of the, festival and direct-to-video B-movie horror scene.
Mm-hmm.
She's not really a named person anymore as she was back when they're in the VHS age, but I light up. I'm like, oh, okay, she's an awesome actress. And much like Joel de Golcoop, I think is how you say his name, who's always in every other Orlando, Florida film, non-budget horror. It's like some of these guys have ended up making their own kind of career because that's just all they do. They go to the local theater company and then, get like a guest starring role on a procedural show like Criminal Minds, and then they go back to doing all these non-budget horror films, and that's their stick, that's their brand now. And Joe Estevez, I am a friend of. Yes, Martin Sheen's younger lookalike brother. He has made a career doing all these kinds of wacky B-D-list horror movies, and he's even action movies, and he's awesome in them all. Sometimes he's even just in an independent movie where he just shows up and plays the crooked sheriff, and it's like, that's awesome. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I looked at this one person's timeline and I was like, God damn, they're not even trying. Just like so much wrong sauce. Like they have Stormy Daniels, yes, infamous, porn star of the former president, in one of them. And then there's this other gal. It's just like, they didn't even try on the title. They didn't even try on the cover, and just looking at it just hurt my eyes. It was just such oversaturated light. I'm like, oh, fuck. I am not going to watch that, because that person definitely was having too much fun, and it was like, it's definitely not going to be an Evil Dead, or I don't know. It's just wacky movie. It's like, yeah, no, I'll pass, because
I feel like you would get along really well with my podcast co-host. You guys, you say a lot of similar things, and the way that you kind of talk about film, and he's very much a tech nerd. So like he is all about
nice.
the lighting and the tech aspects, and we just fought about our last episode. We fought about Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, because we fight about everything. That's kind of our deal. But I love Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, and he just like went off on the technical aspects, and that's his jam.
See, that
so
was
he
an
would love
81
this
movie. It was like that.
I know.
That was
That's
made
what I
for
said.
TV. But yeah, there are other people who I can't tell you how many times I fought. I was taking film at UTA. Everyone wanted their movie to look like Christopher Nolan. And I was just like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You got no money. And it doesn't have to look like that, because everything is all digital. So it can be, again, again, and they were so stuck up with how they wanted everything checked out. I just said, fuck it. And I used my Sony camcorder. It was like, I like this. It's pretty good, as long as you're not directly in the middle of the sunlight and you're, behind a corner,
I mean, that's the thing, is like, if you know what you're doing, then, I mean, sure, having a nice like red camera and having all like the best stuff is great. But like, if you know what you're doing, you can, I mean, there's amazing filmmakers that are shooting on iPhones that the stuff looks amazing. And
was doing it before Soderbergh was using it. But yeah. It's like, I'm seeing some other snobs do, oh, it's not the same. I'm like, you can't tell half the time. And it's just like you say, there's just too many guys who just want to I'm even seeing people get into arguments about Canon versus a Panasonic. And I'm like, go fuck yourselves. If
that's not my jam. That's not where I live. I like to
it shouldn't matter. Yeah. It shouldn't matter. Especially if you're going to make a movie that makes it look like it's shot on a camcorder, instead of trying to try and replicate that in the editing room, why not actually shoot it on a camcorder?
Well, that's why, like, when we had like the found footage explosion and the craze, because that's an example of like, take the fact that you have zero money and you can't afford actors, and like, take it and use it to your advantage, and create and that's when it was good, that's what they did such a great job at, is taking those limitations and making it an advantage and not a disadvantage. I think the challenge is when people, they have limitations, but like to your point, they still want a certain thing, and they want the big budget look and feel, and they want to have all these like cool effects and shit. They can't afford it,
and yet they're still complaining even if they do everything right. Now I'm seeing people, oh, it's clearly not color corrected. I'm like, it looks pretty good to me. So I don't know if you were involved with the production and you just weren't paid and you're bitching. I don't. Everybody's got to start a scene. I mean, you can't even go to a regular site without seeing a bunch of people who are being neo-Nazi saying too much woke garbage. I'm like, you don't even know what that word means. I doubt you do. And what does this have to do with being
Don't get
woke?
me started.
This is like
it's like the people that get really upset because if they see a horror film that has a social issue that it deals with, and they say that there's no place for that in horror. And I'm like, do you know, that's what we were talking about like knowing your horror history. Do you know anything about the genre and what horror has been about and how it has like evolved over the years? And
how it keeps evolving.
It's always been about social issues and dealing with like the real life horror of the time, and it always all of the great horror
I
films
even
that you
get
pretty much
the
love.
oh totally. There's even the complaint it wasn't scary enough. Well, fair, but
Oh,
was
that
it
bothers
even
me too.
going for that? And it's just like because there's some who it's like they're not scary, but it was like it just went into that because it was a gruesome home invasion movie, or it was again it involved a vampire, but it wasn't scary
Well,
vampire. So
there's no like I don't also I think a lot of people are like scary means jump
it's gonna
scares.
vary.
It means like they have a very specific definition of what what fear looks like, and fear is such a personal subjective thing. Like I mentioned that I love psychological horror. That's boring as hell for a lot of people because nothing quote unquote happens a lot of times, but for me that's terrifying because the idea of your own mind turning against you is terrifying to me. So I
It
love
just
that
depends.
shit.
It's
Like I loved Blair Witch Project, and there's like they basically show nothing in that film, but because what I loved about it is what it made me think, my imagination, and how it made me what I didn't see sometimes was scarier than what I do see, and for me that was like that really worked for me, but it bored the hell out of a lot of people.
building on your point of found footage, I'm a huge fan of the Hell House movies. I've seen so many viewers like who are subscribed to Shudder and haven't even seen it. I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding, because I mean, this was
I love
easing up the number. Oh yeah, and they were eating up numbers on Amazon Prime, and it's like that guy did just a simple thing. It's like make it look like a documentary, and then do their best to make it be a plausible story, and then they got really creative in the second half. It's like that's cool. That's the actors really were freaking me out with how they were narrating it, and the music. Music is again, it's just key for me. It's like really play around with that instead of just sounding like this was meant for something like Lifetime or Sci-Fi Channel. I mean, I like making fun of those kind of B movies as well, but I mean, it's like you can really create some dread with some music instead of just making everyone just feel like you hired just a random musician.
Oh yeah, score is incredibly important.
Oh, so awesome when done well.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I even found out what's his name who had scored Hereditary had actually formerly been part of Arcade Fire, and then believe it or not, I listened to a bunch of his other scores one day on Apple Music, and one of them was for like a forests being burned down documentary, and it was actually a freaky score. And I'm like, this isn't even a horror movie, but it's totally portraying a real life terror. Just listening to this.
Are you a fan of Hereditary?
I am.
I love that movie.
Yep. And I think everyone is starting to. I've told everyone the award shows do not matter for years, just because it's a popularity contest and they try to line it up with other popular votes. But it's like there's been articles about it, books about it, and still no one believes it. And I'm like, well, if you don't believe it after Toni Collette being denied, then what won't you believe?
Yeah, that was heartbreaking. I legitimately, when I watched that, thought there's no way she doesn't get a nom for this, and then she didn't, and I was like, the fuck? Like, it's rare that I have seen a performance that affected me so much, and she's a miracle. I love her so much, but that performance is unbelievable.
Oh, totally. And the whole thing is just very well organized.
What I hate about the Oscars is I feel like they'll do something like when Parasite won, where you have this like moment.
Gotta give it to some foreign person this year. We've been ignoring them the last 10 years.
Yeah, you have this moment of hope where you're like, oh, fucking finally, like maybe we turned a corner. Maybe we can finally start to have some respect for genre cinema. And then like the very next year, like something fucking bullshit happens and you're like, all right, well, never mind. I guess that was a fluke. And it's so disappointing because I guess it's my own naivete, but I always get hopeful and think we are, as horror becomes more and more popular and mainstream, that we are getting to a point of it being more respectable and more recognized. And then
maybe
I get disappointed. I don't know. It's probably a pipe dream, but that's my dream.
Oh, and I'm glad you and your co-host bring up stuff like this, because then there's other people is like they wouldn't check out anything like they haven't even heard of before on the video stores. Like then you'll never get anywhere. It's like, yeah, it played at a festival and no one bought it. So then, straight to TV or video was the only market avenue left, and it was a really good movie and caught on. But
well, speaking of Asian horror, I do get very mad at my host because he will not watch anything with subtitles, and that makes me crazy. That makes me like want to like rage.
Boomer.
and he actually says this will make like, I don't know, like this will probably make you like rage as well, but he'll say, oh, if I wanted to read, I'd read a book. And I'm like, I want to punch you in the face right now. Like, thank God we record virtually. I've told him this. I was like, because if you were in front of me and said something like that, I would lose my shit. And it's so disappointing because I feel like and I feel like that's not a rare thing to say. I hear a lot of that where people are like, oh yeah, I'm not into subtitles. I don't read. It's not my thing.
I'm like, not going to choke or take my anger out on anybody, but I am going to just say, I can't respect your opinion. One that gets me is when someone goes to sleep during a movie over like the simplest thing. And it's just like, but just over a simple thing. I get that everyone is wired differently, but when it's like the credits were just going and you went to sleep, I'm like, oh my God, you didn't even try. But then they do the whole, I saw the movie. I'm like, no, you didn't. You were asleep.
It's so funny because we fight about that too, because inevitably when we are talking about films, he's like, yeah, I kind of slept through part of this, or I half paid attention. And then he proceeds to bash the film. And I'm like, listen, motherfucker, like, you don't get to say that you didn't actually watch the film and invest your time and effort into it and then turn around and judge it and say it wasn't good. Like, that's not how it works. You have to give something the effort and the attention it deserves, and then you can have a critical analysis of it, and then you can decide if it was or wasn't for you. But it drives me mental. Like, we actually get into some pretty like dragged down verbal fights because I get so mad, and he knows it triggers me and he thinks it's funny, but it makes me like crazy.
Yeah, I will dedicate as much as I can and at least do some research on the movie and not act like it is beyond approach. It's like, okay, it was well shot. I dug the handheld. I really enjoyed the interaction, but I'm not even the nitpicky type where it's just say, where did that subplot go? Oh my God, it was trying to be like this other movie. Or maybe it was marketed a similar way, but now we got people judging the trailer and inserting that as part of the critique. I'm like, no. See,
yeah,
that is not in the movie. So, I mean, you're going to be disappointed one way or the other if you go on just
and I think one of the things I tell him, I think there's a difference. There's like, I feel like there's two different types of people who watch films. I mean, there's more than that, but I'll just be really like black and white here. I think there's a group of people who watch films like me. I want to love everything I see. You have to actively work to make me not love a film because I love
I like it so bad it's good sometimes.
And yeah, I like that too. I like a wide range. I think as long as I appreciate, if I know what the film's trying to be and I judge it on how well does it achieve that goal. So if it's trying to be a stupid, like silly, irreverent B movie, I don't think it's fair to judge it and be like, well, I hate those kind of films, and therefore this movie.
Or the
terrible.
acting
it's
was
like,
bad.
No.
I'm like, well, yeah, some of it will be. Maybe that was intentional, like, and you're taking it too seriously.
Yeah, it's like what I judge a film on how well does it achieve the goal that it's trying to achieve. But I want to love everything, and I go in thinking positive things about it, and I think there's another set of people that watch films wanting to hate it. Like the recent Halloween's a good example. People go to movies like that to be like, well, let's see how much this one pisses me off, or let's see like if this one can like make me happy. And it's just this negativity, and they go in
and then they act like they are the final verdict. Like
it's so gross.
From this point on, no one will ever be talking about it. I'm like, bullshit. It's gonna hit video. People are gonna reevaluate it and say I still hate it, or I actually like it this time, or this is my first time seeing it. I really enjoyed it after hearing all these people praise it or talk shit about it. And it's just like, yeah. And on our show, we try to just let the hype die down. We're going to wait a while before we're not going to even rank all the Halloweens or Star Wars like side by side. We'll just do a quick ranking.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones we don't like, we'll just do a civilized bitch slap, so to speak. And the ones we do like, we'll just say, hey, here's why this changed me. And this is me talking on nostalgia here, yada, yada. It's like, do that. Don't, again, like to say, I'm a shame anyone who likes it. It's like, shit.
Yeah, as if there's again, like I don't mind. There's no such thing as a film that is for everyone. And I actually think
Impossible.
I know, and I think some of the best films are really damn polarizing. Like when I hear that an audience is polarized by a film, I'm immediately like, I'm probably gonna love it, because that's usually most of the films that I love are the ones that are pretty controversial or that are pretty.
I go for the ones that instantly got 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay. sign
Yeah,
me up.
I'm like, let's do it. But I don't mind somebody being like, yeah, I didn't like it. It's not for me. That's what you're supposed to do. What I do mind is when people are like, oh no, it's just terrible, and you're wrong if you don't agree that it's terrible. It's just
There's
objectively
no
bad.
such
And
thing
I'm
as
like,
wrong. It's opinions.
yeah, but that's not how this works. You get to talk about what worked for you and what didn't, and there are there's certain standards you can intellectually like judge a film on. Like you can judge on like how the sound design and the camera quality.
I'm glad you brought that
stuff,
up.
but
There are so many people who are anal retentive about sound, and it's kind of like with video game. You have to pretty much try it out for yourself, because you can't tell how much of it is that person's deaf or always needs subtitles. I even recall someone even doing that. That was a Blu-ray review, and they gave like a star off because they came with no subtitles. I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't be so deaf. Fuck. It's like,
yeah,
you don't need it half the time, and sometimes it gives it away, especially if it's a mystery or a horror movie. But yeah, then there's other ones. It's like, yes, exactly like you say. This is like I would see that with video games, especially in Game Informer. Is like they bashed a game that was based on a movie, and I played it, and I'm like, yeah, you guys just are bad with twiddling your thumbs and playing any kind of game. So I had no problem with these combos. Or maybe you just sucked at it and you just decided to be unfair and say, I couldn't get past this, so I'm gonna just I use cheat codes. But yeah, it's the same thing with the sound. You can't tell half the time if just someone's just they're at a record studio for like music or just movies in general, and they hear one thing they don't like and it's not good. I'm like, well, okay, so maybe the sound ended abruptly, or maybe you're just getting it mixed up with that you don't like the movie or how it's edited, and you're mixing that up with as like, because maybe the Foley is good, but it ended too suddenly, or again, you couldn't hear the music or the dialogue, but I don't know.
No, and I find a lot of times people, when they're, especially this day in the streaming age, is a lot of people are watching like on their phones and on these like little devices.
Yeah, they don't
they're
know
not getting.
They got it.
Yeah, and they're complaining about the sound or the picture quality and stuff, and I'm like, oh. And this is why I like have this thing about theatrical experience. One, because I just prefer it, but also I feel bad for the artistry of making these films, and they are designed to be shown in the theater, and that's where you get the full scope of like how good it looks and how good it sounds. And then it's very hard to get that at home if you're not watching on a really nice TV with really great sound and stuff. And I'm not saying that everything has to be that, but then
I got a pretty good TV, but there's a lot of people who have a shitty TV. Or
they do, or they just watch on their computer because it's easier. And I sometimes I do too, but when I do that, I'm not
I've had some bad
critiquing a film.
But that's the other thing. It's pretty hard to find a bad theater. But then there's the other ones. They get into just the money war, where it's just like, well, it can't be that good if it's already in the dollar theater. It's like, you don't know that. Maybe it only got promoted for a few different screens. Well, it's pretty good for a dollar theater. I'm like, I think this is a pretty good theater in general, but I don't know.
I will say this is a good topic to point out that people not seeing it doesn't necessarily mean not good. Those aren't always apples to apples.
There's plenty
of brilliant films that people just don't see because they just don't have enough marketing budget, or they don't get into the mainstream zeitgeist. Yeah. Some of my favorite films are films like nobody's freaking seen, and they're brilliant. So
right. Or it was years ago and they're acting like it was a hit at the time. It's like, no, it wasn't.
Yeah.
We embraced it later, and it came to life on the second going. And so I can't wait till we do the whole redo the top 250 on IMDb. That's going to be interesting how many sarcastic picks we do versus how many are just awesome, but not that awesome. I don't know.
I mean, and obviously that's why we do what we do, right? That's why we're doing podcasts and things and talking about these films that hopefully people discover stuff that they might not have otherwise. That's always like my hope, is that
Totally.
besides the fact that it's just super fun to talk, you know, being a horror nerd, to talk with other horror nerds and talk about the things that we love. But I always hope that maybe somebody will be like, hey, maybe I'll check that out.
Check it out soon. Yeah.
Yeah, and then discover, because I mean, I still remember like the first time I discovered some of these films, and I was like mind blown, right? Just like the founder of Tartan, I was like, holy shit, like this just changed my life. And then when you have that kind of experience, it's pretty spectacular, and I want more people to have those experiences.
Let alone just even understand what keeps film buffs like us just going. And it seems like everyone just kind of wants to play it safe and just say, I want the Cliff Notes version. I'm like, well, set aside some time. I don't want to set aside some time. How long is it? It's as long as any movie, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours. Why? What's the matter? If you wanted to see it, you'd see it anyway.
Yeah, we are in a very like ADD culture of like even 2 hours is too long for a lot of people, and they need
you don't
shortest
know if
runtime
it's that
possible.
they got kids or what, but it's like, for real.
Yeah, I mean, I get, and listen, I understand not having time. Time is a precious commodity. I feel like I never have time, but also, I don't know, I guess it's just you make time for the things that matter. So we're, you know, people that love movies, so you make time for it because it's important. Which, it sounds weird. That's weird for a lot of people to think when you say movies are important. They're like, no, it's just fluffy entertainment. No, actually, like that's not how I interact with
It's
movies.
not
For
all
me,
popcorn.
they're extremely important, and they're
I
works of
binge
art.
a show when I actually want to see someone, again, bitch slap the bad guy on screen, or you know, try and dodge the serial killer's knife that's being flung at him. You know?
Yeah.
And some people say that doesn't do anything for me unless it's in 3D. I'm like, oh, okay, strongly disagree.
Have you seen Squid Game?
I have not yet. That's another one. I'm gonna wait for the hype to die down and for people to just stop bitching about it, and then I'll just say, hey, you know, is this
You're one of those people. You're like, I don't want to watch it when everybody else is watching it.
Yeah, is like, well, and then yeah, that'll be the topic. It's like, what was the hype about? Are people just not bright enough to know that they're, after years of seeing stuff like again, you know, stuff like Cube or Hard Target or
I love
Ready or
Cube,
Not.
by the way. Yeah.
Oh, well, we might have to get you on an episode for that.
I
But yeah, it's
love
like
Cube.
any just fight to the death or survival movie. It's just like, do they just really not know what they're in for? It's like, are they going in the trailer? Do they just randomly watch it and just get offended?
I don't know. I haven't actually seen it either, and I think it looks right up my alley. But I'm not really waiting for the hype to die down. I'm just waiting to get through October movie craziness. But it's definitely on my list to check out. I'm super excited that it's like getting watched. You know, I mean, I know people are having reactions to it, but at least people are watching it. That's pretty cool.
Hopefully. It's like,
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, when people watch it, that's the thing. Is like, if people watch it, then they make more of this kind of stuff, and then you get more access to more foreign horror, and because obviously these platforms want to do what's profitable. So the more that it's profitable,
and
the
then
more we'll get.
I hate that argument too. It's like, he did it for the money. Yes, he did. And then he did it for other money. But yeah, it's like, yeah, yes, you can tell. Sometimes, I don't know, it depends. There's plenty of people who weren't invested in a project and it took off against their expectations, or they did the Coppola effect of always doing a good job wherever they were. And some of them took off, and the ones that were precious to their heart didn't electrify an audience in any way, shape, or form. So it's like, yeah, it's like, but yes, then there are some other ones who's like, yeah, they're really not good at doing this, but they keep being hired because their movie is under budget and on time. So it's like, and you got that argument.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't like people that are. It's the same argument. It's like, sure, do something for art and for passion and for love, but at the end of the day, you want it to be seen. Like and it's not even about like, oh, I want to be rich and famous. I mean, for some people, I'm sure that's a goal, but if I'm going to make something that I'm passionate about, I
Like
would
Asylum,
like
what's the
people
point?
to experience it. Like we all do. Anybody who's an artist, you can do something for
I don't
passion
want it
and for
seen.
love, but you want people to see it.
I hope so.
Otherwise, you're just talking to yourself. You're interacting with yourself, and that's not.
If
That's
I
not
make a
super
stupid
fun.
movie, I'm going to make sure that it was intentionally stupid, not intentionally bad, like, you know, the mockbusters. You know, it's like Sharknado and all that. It's like, good God. Now everyone's arguing whether it was intentionally or unintentionally bad. It's like, it's just bad. And I would not be proud of this. I know some people like it, but it's not for me. I'd like to think that, yes, people who are being hired, like, you know, it hurts when you see a filmmaker bashing it. You don't know if it was just one scene that was cut and they just instantly disowned it. I want the Alan Smithy equivalent, or or they were never going to compromise to begin with, and the producer just said, "Hey, it's just too long to sell," or whatever. I don't know. It really is perplexing. And then then there are some people who's like, I don't even know if it's good or bad. I just want it to be judged like a painting. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you want some kind of reaction. Don't be pretentious with me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a fine line between honoring your integrity and wanting people to.
I mean, I get it. You don't know. You really don't know how they'll respond.
Mhm.
But if you're happy
Yeah.
or satisfied with it to some extent, or you've compromised enough before the studio takes it over, then you should just say whatever happens, happens. It's just not easy.
It's not, for sure.
Thank you ever so much for being on here. I will definitely
Yeah.
share your site. Do you want to plug it real fast?
Sure. Yeah, it's morbidlybeautiful.com.
Morbid.
And yeah, it's a site dedicated to genre, and we cover everything. So it's books and film, music, comics, anime, all that stuff. It is definitely heavy on the film focus, and we do tend to focus a lot on the indie side of things. So a lot of stuff that you might not get elsewhere, or that people might not be talking about enough. That's kind of a big passion of mine, is really exposing great art that might not otherwise get a platform. So yeah, I mean, we post content every single day. I have some amazing writers working for me. We also have a podcast network, and we've got some really cool shows on the network as well. So yeah, I would love if you check it out. I think we're doing some pretty cool stuff.
I think it's very cool.
Thank you. Thank you so
Especially
much.
from the videos you've shared, where it's like, I think you even shared a few videos that were just kind of political, but they were very well done, like covers of other songs. It's like, yeah, it's like, this is how everyone embraces Instagram, not the TikTok stuff. It's like, go beyond that and actually, you know, just have some kind of interaction.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
People even forget about Vine, how that closed down and got replaced by other sites. Is like, but that was kind of a cool kind of precursor to this whole thing, where people would just kind of make it a thing where it's like, I'm going to review something and then I'm going to fling the DVD case at the camera, or do something funny, and that's my shtick, that's my signature, and you're going to like it or share it with your other friends if I my shit funny. And it's like, it's very interesting how we are just evolving through all this stuff that's created on a computer or on a phone.
Yeah, I love my co-host hates social media. I love it though, because I love, like, I'm big on community and being able to share the things I'm passionate about
You
with other
should
people.
love hate it. It's like, yeah, I hate the spam too. I hate the person who goes off topic too, but that's inevitable. You should be glad someone took the time to comment or interact with you in some way.
Yeah, I always appreciate it.
It got annoying at first when some podcast guys would just argue with each other. Oh no, this is the worst. Listen to my episode. I'll prove you wrong. And it was like, oh my God, you guys getting all in an argument and the episode's not even polished yet. Shit.
Yeah, I think as long as people are respectful, I love a good debate and conversation. And I recently posted a film. I won't mention it here because we'll spiral, but posted a film that I watched, and it's controversial, and people had some things to say about it, and but it was fine because they were really respectful, and I try to be respectful in my response, and that was super fun. So sometimes that's nice to get a little debating going on as long as people aren't calling each other names and telling them they're stupid and all that kind of stuff. I don't like that at all.
And let alone they do the whole I can't respect someone. Whatever. I got into an argument with someone on the Hellraisers.
Yeah.
I can't respect anyone who doesn't like any of the ones that aren't by Clyde Barker. It was like, okay, well, I can't respect you for not respecting other opinions. So how about that? Boom.
Yeah, I yelled at my co-host because he said he couldn't respect anybody who likes Rob Zombie films, and he knows that I like them. So
And then why
I
is
was
he-
like, and I know he does things like that so that I will get angry, but I'm like, Jesus.
It's like no one is asking you to agree with me. I get it. There are some very frustrating movies where nothing is happening, or it's a very annoying music video, or you're like, fooled me once. I don't see how anyone could find this interesting because there's virtually nothing going on, just endless scenery and someone, I don't know, just staring off into space. And then, yes, there are some slow burns that are great, but then there are other ones where it's like, okay, well, I'm surprised anyone got that illusion from it. I don't know if it's people who watched it too many times or kind of pulling a Tommy Wiseau The Room and they're just making up random shit so people will rewatch the movie, or if they legit got that from the movie. And so I think that's just it. It's like, again, you know what kind of field you're in the minute you're getting into certain movies and you like what you like. It gets even more annoying though too when you got people who don't want to even, I don't know, just like they absolutely just refuse to discuss a certain genre. It's like, well, okay, I get it. You're not into those kinds of movies, but I think if you can do a good a job as this, you can do a good a job as that. Or, I mean, or you could even just flat out just say, well, I'm pretty good at ranking this kind of thing or going about this review that way. And I think too often, yes, you're seeing too many podcast hosts who just want to just book a random guest and steal the other guy's followers, or they just want to have a random round table but no actual discussion and just bitch at each other. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to be very pleasant to the ears.
Yeah, for sure.
I saw Stinker Madness, and I hate to sound like I'm bashing, but I found them to be very snobby just with other podcasters and like take the snob too seriously. This is like, and they were instantly acting like the so-called bad movie they were taking on was just without merit instantly every time, like the worst of the worst. And it's like, there's different kinds of stink burgers. So I think you should outline this a bit more, but whatever. That's
Absolutely.
don't keep me from bitch slapping these movies that are innocent for the most part, but whatever. Thank you for being on the show, and
Thank you.
I'll talk with you guys again soon.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try
They must be destroyed on sight.
the new Podcast Cure-All? Sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of
They must be destroyed on sight.
as needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of it.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this film.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was going
How
to be a
did you
rough
watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
It's time, let's check our queue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. With a one-last plot holes of gratuitous movies. It's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy. At eilfm.podbean.com.
Welcome to Who Was She podcast. I am your host, Tara Jabari. After a decade working in documentaries, marketing, and all things digital media, I found that podcasting is a strong medium to share stories. After years of producing for others, I decided to start my own biographical podcast. Who Was She will focus on the life of a woman throughout Baha'i history. The first season is about Lydia Zamenhof. Lydia's story explores the subjects of the power of language and faith. Her father invented the universal language Esperanto, and she came from a Jewish family and became a Baha'i. She grew up during World War I and was killed during World War II in a concentration camp, despite heroic efforts to save her life. How can one person's life intersect with so many others, connect across borders, and inspire a biography which inspired this podcast? Over the next few weeks, I will share her story with you and the lives that were most affected by her and those who affected her life as well. They include her father, Ludwig Zamenhof, her spiritual mother, American journalist Martha Root, and the Baha'i German soldier Fritz Mako, who worked for the resistance undercover while having to serve the Nazi Party. I want to thank the author Wendy Heller and George Ronald Publishing for their blessing to let me use Heller's biography, Lydia, The Life of Lydia Zamenhof, Daughter of Esperanto, as a main and instrumental resource for this podcast. So please subscribe and learn about this amazing woman who traveled through 3 continents in an effort to bring unity through the power of language. You can also find more information on our Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at Who Was She Podcast. Music was composed and performed by Sam Red. I am your host, Tara Jabari. Join us next time as we begin our journey about Lydia Zamenhof.
Are you sick of the same old stale podcasts? Well then join Vanessa and Darren as they dissect movies of all kinds. The 2 lifelong cinema lovers bring their favorites, curiosities, and first-time watches to the operating table and inject them with a healthy dose of snark. Then there's the waiting room, where they examine books and short stories. So just look for them on Apple Podcasts and where fine podcasts are available. They're part of the Legion Podcast Network. Follow them on Twitter at VD Clinic Pod. Join them on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/VD Clinic Pod. Or email them at vdclinicpod@gmail.com. They're ready to cure what ails you. And still, they just might be a little contagious.
Hi there. It's Heather from the Watching Netflix Without You podcast. Did you know that there are over 1,200 Netflix original feature films and documentaries? And that number is only growing. So I've made it my mission to watch as many as I possibly can. Then, with a delightful guest or guests, disclaimer, more often than not my brother Ryan, we spend an episode rating, reviewing, and discussing a film at length. The first half of every episode is spoiler-free for those who haven't seen it yet, and in the second half, after a very clear spoiler warning, we dive into it. And that's really about it. You can listen to Watching Netflix Without You on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more.
We now continue with our program.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up